The three most common sleep disorders in children would be snoring, which is almost invariably due to enlarged adenoids and or tonsils, persistent failure to settle after waking in the night in generally infants and toddlers, and what are called the parasomnias, which are night terrors and nightmares in children. In essence, not doing what their parents think they ought to be doing. In other words, frequently infants and toddlers, they'll go to sleep, then wake, and then won't go back to sleep again. The other common problem is, or symptoms is, symptoms of snoring, restless sleep, not waking in the mornings refreshed, in other words, having to be dragged out of bed, sleepy at school, for example, and things like that. Adolescents, of course, are notorious for going to bed late, and in fact, your one circadian rhythm is not 24 hours, but 25 hours. So in studies where volunteers have been in uniform light conditions 24 hours a day with no clocks, they all go to sleep approximately 1 hour later every day. Adolescents going to sleep at 1 o'clock in the morning and not being able to get up for school is a notorious thing. And this is due to a shift in the circadian rhythm, which needs to be put back to a more conventional place. The commonest cause overwhelmingly for snoring and in children is due to adenotonsillar hypertrophy, and it's the physical obstruction of airflow through the back of the nose, mostly due to the adenoids, but also due to the tonsils, that actually gets in the way. And if one puts one's fingers over one's nose, one can only breathe through one's mouth, so one will inevitably snore. In infants and toddlers with persistent failure to go back to sleep, it's important to remember that sleeping, like most things in life, is a learnt behavior. It is not natural. So the rules about going to sleep at this time and waking up at that time have to be learnt by the infant and toddler, and some children are better at learning it than others. And to be blunt, some parents are better at teaching it than others. And it's really getting the two together so that the child has understood effectively that this is the moment for going to sleep, and later on will be the moment for waking up. Like everything else in paediatrics, and indeed the whole of medicine, taking a detailed history from the family and, where appropriate, the child, is of crucial importance. And we go through a typical night from the evening meal through bath time, bedtime routine, what parents do if they wake up later, what are the effects of the snoring on the child, what is in the adolescent's room, how many computers, phones, lights, and etc., and other distractions that prevent going to sleep. That is where 80 to 90% of the information will be found. The only important test, if it is required, and it isn't always required by any means, is a sleep study where the child is admitted for an assessment overnight, and the parent stays with them, where various leads and cables are put on, no needles, of course, and one can assess how they breathe, whether they have difficulty breathing due to their snoring, whether their oxygen levels are normal, whether the waste gas level, namely carbon dioxide, is also normal. And that can give very useful information about whether, for example, surgery is required, i.e. taking out your adenoids and tonsils, but quite often it's blindingly obvious anyway without a sleep study, and whether other things are required, especially in special circumstances. For example, children with Down syndrome, trisomy 21, or children with neurodevelopmental disorders, where this becomes much more important, or children with neuromuscular disorders, for example, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is, of course, a specialized subject and not common. For snoring children, which most commonly occurs between the ages of 3 and 6 years, medically, a trial of montelukast for about 8 to 12 weeks does have scientific evidence for benefit in a considerable number, but not everybody. However, if that fails and there are large adenoids and tonsils, then I'm afraid it's a referral to the ENT surgeons for consideration of removal of the adenoids and either shaving or removal of the tonsils, depending on which is the bigger problem. For night waking or failing to night settle in younger children, then this is a matter of training and having a sleep plan. And one of the biggest issues are parents disagreeing about how to manage the child under those circumstances. And I often say to parents, I don't particularly care what the sleep plan is, so long as you both agree to it, write it down, and then absolutely religiously stick to it. For adolescents going to sleep too late and not getting up for school, then the trick is to use a half-term holiday and to force the adolescent to go to bed 3 hours later every day. So if they're going to bed at 1 a.m., we then make them go to sleep at 4 a.m., then 7 a.m. in the morning, 10 a.m., etc. And after about 7 days, you've got round to about 9 to 10 p.m. at night. And it is much easier to push a circadian rhythm than to pull a circadian rhythm back. Well, as anybody who's ever read the internet, there is absolutely acres of advice on sleep management and any number of books. I don't think in the UK there is an official government sleep guideline, except that sleep is extremely good for one. And in the United States, the average amount of sleep in adults has declined by about 90 minutes over the last 50 years, which always I use as an explanation for why there are so many gunshot injuries in the US, because paranoia is the one thing that's guaranteed to increase in any adult or older child when they are deprived of sleep. It is worth remembering one thing. We all wake up 7 or 8 times a night. That is evolutionarily essential, because when we were sleeping outside thousands of years ago, we had to make sure we weren't about to be eaten by lions. So the problem is never that someone wakes up, it's that they don't go back to sleep again. That is always the issue.